facing the police every single day.
Sink in until to camp. He was kind of akin to a rock star, I would say. In a child's eyes, he was extremely popular. Everybody, a lot of the boys at that point called him Uncle Bill.
Bill Sheehan was a Boy Scout leader in the 1980s at Camp Miles in Punta Gorda, popular with young scouts across Southwest Florida. Aaron Averhart, a former Boy Scout at the camp, claims Sheehan molested and raped him for 3 years, starting when he was 12.
I was immature for my age, so I think I did not fully grasp what was happening, though a base part of me obviously realized that it was something physical, sexual. It didn't really sink in until the next summer when it progressed. I don't know how I managed to justify returning the second year, and the same could be said every year as it got worse and worse. He just had a way of making me feel like this was something I had put out there and asked for.
Aaron was a sunny little kid. He didn't know a stranger. When he came back from his first summer camp, he was 180 degrees different. I'm telling you, it was really scary. And, you know, he just couldn't talk to us. We just knew something was terribly wrong.
It was later in the evening, and I was out of my cabin to avoid him, and I was just wandering the trails somewhere between wanting to die and not knowing what to do.
So one evening, I got a knock at my door, and there's Kathy Little. She goes, "Mr. Briggs, you got a problem." I said, "What's going on?" And there's little Aaron, tears flowing down his face. So what's going on? So I asked them to come on in, and they sat down. She goes, "Do you want to explain it, Aaron, or do you want me to?"
After Averhart came forward, Bill Sheehan was investigated and quietly suspended from the Boy Scouts, but never charged with sexual abuse. Since then, almost 50 men, former scouts, have come forward saying Sheehan sexually abused them, too, in Foxborough, Massachusetts, where he worked before coming to Camp Miles.
When I discovered Foxborough, it was a mixed bag. It was a blessing and a curse in a way. It was wonderful to know after 30 years that I was not alone, which was a lot to absorb. I don't know that I ever would have gotten to the point I'm at had I not told my story at one point and encountered a group of survivors, which is an extremely powerful thing. Telling the story to people in Lee County and Fort Myers who represent the second phase of his activities, victims and survivors. I think it's long overdue for starters. I hope that it provides people with ability, if they lack it, to address the things that they've been through and ultimately, hopefully, find some kind of peace with the things they struggle with. Contact with me was in that I was staying in the campsite that my troop had stayed in the previous week, and they vacated, but I stayed in the tent that I was in. The camp was not occupied for that week. His first inappropriate contact with me was in that camp and in that tent, and it was the first or second night probably that I was there as the full week, and he appeared in my tent late at night as I was sleeping and climbed in the cot with me and pretty much dry humped me, rubbed me against him, essentially dry humping, and did that pretty much for the remainder of the summer to varying degrees. He did the same thing in the waterfront in the lake as well. It was a man-made lake. There were lots of tannins, so the water was darker, so you couldn't really see what he was doing below the surface. To the suffocation stage almost. Initially it started with the dunking in the water and rubbing against his crotch, and it got to the point where he would hold me underwater to the suffocation stage almost, so I would come up grasping and crying, and he was even confronted by a scoutmaster who caught him doing that, and he accused me of being too sensitive, Bill Sheehan did. After that, it progressed to the cot, the tent, and the staff cabin eventually, and his violence often included choking, so I would often pass out, wake up with him getting dressed after raping me, but the last 2 years was far more violent and physical than the first two, and just was progressive, but the last two were just by far more intense.
Organization for young men that both boys were interested in scouting, because it's just, or it used to be, I don't know anymore, it used to be such a good organization for young men. The things that they get out of scouting are just, I think they're lifelong values. We were naive, I guess, you know. Just thought things were the way they were. It was like the last puzzle piece, clicking in, you know? Aha. Now we get the whole picture from the beginning to the end.
But it makes us sad at the same point with knowing we could have helped him.
Well, honey, we couldn't help what we didn't know, you know? Believe me, I have cried many a tear, cried myself to sleep many nights, hurting for Aaron, wanting him to be able to let go, but it's not that easy. I think he thought that he had dealt with it, but he never really had. And when he actually started dealing with it, I mean, it was helpful, but it was also very painful. You know, I went up to Foxborough with him on his second trip, and I guess he told you about destroying that building that Bill Sheehan had built. It was a very cold day up in Massachusetts, and they had a pile of, what do you call those hammers? Sledgehammers. And said, everybody that wants to take a shot at this building, you pick up a sledgehammer and you go. They were just batting that thing away, and by the end of the day, even the foundation had been cleared away. There was no indication that there had ever been a building there. And you know, even though Aaron was not abused up there, he was abused down here, but he was still abused by the same man that abused all those people up there. And naturally, he was going to rejoice, you know, that they were tearing down this horrible thing. I feel Aaron's, his innocence and his youth were stolen. I hate it that it happened to our kid, you know.
It was hush, hush. It made me sick. Dozens accuse ex-Boy Scout leader of sex abuse. Are there more victims? The Boy Scouts has listed thousands of men as ineligible to volunteer because of sex abuse allegations. William Sheehan of SW Florida's Camp Miles was one of them. Patricia Borns, Fort Myers News Press. Updated 10:34 a.m. EST November 6, 2019. Note to readers, this story includes graphic details of alleged child sex abuse. If you or someone you know is experiencing abuse, contact the Child Help National Child Abuse Hotline at 1-800-422-4453. Keith Briggs will never forget the knock on his cabin door at Camp Miles, a Boy Scouts of America camp in the swamp and pine flatwoods of Punta Gorda. The year was 1989. There stood one of his counselors with a young Aaron Averhart in tow. "Mr. Briggs, you've got a problem," the former camp director recalled his counselor's words. "Sheehan's going into his tent every night and abusing him sexually." For 100 years, the Boy Scouts of America has kept a list of men, today numbering in the thousands, who have been banned from scouting for real or alleged sexual misconduct. William Sheehan was one in Southwest Florida. From Foxborough, Massachusetts, the teacher and scout leader came in 1981 to direct water sports at Camp Miles, where each year children from 5 counties attend by the hundreds. They called him Uncle Bill. The Boy Scouts Southwest Florida Council, which runs the camp, quietly suspended Sheehan after that 1989 visit. There the matter seemed to end. In reality, it was just beginning. Over the next 10 years, first one man, then many, began coming forward in Foxborough, alleging Sheehan had raped or molested them when they were Boy Scouts in the 1960s and 1970s. Here's what we know now. 1962, William Sheehan, 24, begins his teaching career in Foxborough. 1963, volunteers as Scoutmaster of Foxborough's Troop 70. 1981, moves with his family to Fort Myers. Teaches at San Carlos Park Elementary. Oversees water sports at the Boy Scouts Camp Miles. 1989, Aaron Averhart alleges Sheehan is sexually molesting him at Camp Miles, but Charlotte County Sheriff's Office investigators find no grounds to pursue the case. 1990, Sheehan resigns from the school district, his teaching license revoked. 1998, a Foxborough man alleges Sheehan sexually molested him in the 1970s. More complaints follow, with striking similarities. 2012, Massachusetts detectives travel to Fort Myers to arrest Sheehan but find him in the late stages of Alzheimer's disease. 2016, Averhart and other Sheehan accusers in Foxborough discover one another for the first time. 2017, Sheehan dies in a Fort Myers nursing home from complications of Alzheimer's disease, never arrested or convicted of a crime. Interactive map, William Sheehan's path to Southwest Florida. Today, nearly 50 Foxborough men have identified themselves as survivors of rape or other sexual abuse by Sheehan, but only one in Southwest Florida. Yet, at the time of that fateful knock, the scout leader had lived for 9 years in Southwest Florida, taught third graders at San Carlos Park Elementary School and showed hundreds of boys how to swim and row in the brown-stained lakes of Camp Miles. Under cover of that dark water, Sheehan would molest me in plain sight of other swimmers by dunking me, then rubbing me up and down his crotch, said Averhart, a native of Fort Myers. Were other boys caught in his web? Averhart believes so. As evidenced by Foxborough, Bill Sheehan could not stop at 1 or 2 boys, and continued the pattern here. "I'm certain that I cannot be the only one," he said. He and other survivors agreed to share their stories with the news press to encourage sexually abused men and boys to break their silence. The Boy Scouts of America did not answer the news press question about when it first became aware of sexual abuse allegations against Sheehan, but it did issue a public statement. First and foremost, the Boy Scouts of America believes victims. To those who were harmed, we grieve with you, we respect you, and we want to help you heal. Read the full Boy Scouts of America statement. Southwest Florida Scout Executive Greg Graham said he would gladly speak with Averhart and intercede with the national office to help him afford therapy. However, Graham would not let the Eagle Scout or the news press tour Camp Miles, even with an escort. Sheehan's sons, who live in Fort Myers and attended Camp Miles when Averhart did, were contacted for this story. Reached by phone, Edward Sheehan had no comment. Stephen Sheehan did not respond to repeated calls or email, and certified mail was returned unopened. More, Boy Scouts lawsuit, parents trust teachers and counselors, but should they? I considered killing myself. 8th grade was probably the first year I seriously considered killing myself. Averhart begins in Finding Foxborough, the book he recently completed and hopes to publish about his experiences at Camp Miles. He had come to the wilderness of over 1,000 acres in 1986, full of excitement, expecting to learn new skills and enjoy his first taste of freedom away from home. Instead, he alleges, summer camp had turned into a prison sentence. I was being raped and molested regularly, and he was growing more brazen and violent as time went on. Tweet this. Aaron Averhart, former Camp Miles scout. 8th grade was probably the first year I seriously considered killing myself. Averhart wouldn't know for years that he wasn't alone. More, hundreds of former Boy Scouts reveal new sexual abuse claims, exposing 150 alleged pedophiles. Sheehan allegedly began with boys like Kevin Corliss, a Foxborough 7-year-old in the 1960s whose tunnel vision and dyslexia set him apart. As a second grader, I don't know if I even realized why he was holding me so tight and humping, said Corliss, now 63. As the sex became overt, he did realize, Corliss said. He'd grab me, haul me down the stream bed, and off came the bathing suits. But at the time you just didn't say anything. Bill Sheehan was like a god in our town, Corliss said. No one said anything until Averhart, a desperate youth of 15, poured out his troubles to a sympathetic Camp Miles counselor. I was either going to tell someone or kill myself, he had decided. Sheehan by this time had been in Southwest Florida for 9 years. More, Our Little Secret. Eagle Scout says writing graphic book about sex abuse helped him heal. Who was William Sheehan? He would start rubbing me. In an emotional interview with the news press, Briggs remembered Averhart as a nice kid, a little bit of a guy, about 90 pounds soaking wet. Keith Briggs was the director of the Boy Scouts Camp Miles in Charlotte County when Aaron Averhart says he was raped and molested over a 3-year period by Scout leader Bill Sheehan. Averhart went to a camp counselor and Briggs to say he was abused. Hide caption. Keith Briggs was the director of the Boy Scouts Camp Miles in Charlotte County when Aaron Averhart says he was raped and molested over a 3-year period by Scout leader Bill Sheehan. Averhart went to a camp counselor and Briggs to say he was abused. Andrew West / USA Today Network, Florida. What did he do, Aaron? He recalled their conversation. Well, he would get in bed with me and he would start rubbing me, the boy said. Rubbing what? Briggs asked. Well, my privates, he replied. And he would want me to rub him. And he would get an erection. And one thing would just lead to another. And the little fellow, you know he wasn't telling a story, Briggs said. The tears were flowing down his face. I called my supervisor, and the next I knew, I was transferred. Sheehan denied the allegations, describing Averhart as an attention-seeking child. He told Charlotte Sheriff's investigators that he would give the boys hugs when they asked, but didn't recall touching any of them inappropriately. As it has done in response to thousands of sexual abuse allegations, the Boy Scouts of America quietly suspended Sheehan. A letter from Steve Shimp, a Southwest Florida Council leader still active in scouting, promised confidentiality and offered the possibility of appeal and reinstatement. It was hush, hush. It made me sick. It ruined this young man's life, Briggs said. A misunderstanding by the child. The sheriff's office exonerated the scout leader. It appears to have been a misunderstanding by the child, Detective Gary Chrisman wrote in his report. The only basis the child has is that Mr. Sheehan got an erection while in the pool popping his back. No further investigation is needed. Marla Cox, a protective investigator on the case, now deceased, called it a borderline story, not worth jeopardizing a teacher's career. As he reflects on how he handled the interview, Averhart is racked by guilt over the details he left out, details he has poured into his book. He used his saliva, spit on my backside to lubricate it. But he was too mortified to speak of them as a child. Averhart did tell Chrisman that Sheehan visited his cabin 5 out of 6 nights a week and slipped into his cot, rubbing against him, the transcript shows. Why wasn't that enough to look more deeply? Chrisman, now retired, didn't answer repeated calls from the news press, but he did respond to a text message from Averhart in 2018. It's all too common for kids not to be open about what happened and even deny it completely, the former detective wrote. Without any real memory, it sounds like you gave just enough information that we believed something wasn't right, but it wasn't enough to make a formal charge. A 1981 photo shows William Sheehan at the Ahern School where he taught in Foxborough, Massachusetts before moving to Southwest Florida the same year. Sheehan was a Boy Scout leader in both places, and in both left behind survivors who allege he molested or raped them. Show caption. A 1981 photo shows William Sheehan at the Ahern School where he taught in Foxborough, Massachusetts before moving to Southwest Florida the same year. Sheehan. Foxborough reporter photo. Asked if it would handle Averhart's allegations the same way today. For example, Sheehan taught 3rd grade in Lee County, where detectives would have learned that parents had complained about him had they asked. The sheriff's office said it could not find its investigation file and could not comment on the case. Learning by word of mouth of the fresh allegations, former San Carlos Park Elementary School principal Bert Tolbert called for the State Department of Education to conduct its own inquiry in 1990. On 2 occasions in the past we have met concerning your conduct around students, and in Scout Camp, Tolbert wrote to Sheehan, according to the state's investigative file. Your questionable behavior was discussed and you were cautioned to conduct yourself in a manner that could not be interpreted as being questionable. Asked by the news press about those meetings, Tolbert said he had no memory of them, but, if I wrote that, it must have occurred, he said. Support quality local journalism like this by becoming a subscriber. Subscribe. With Averhart's complaint, the state permanently revoked Sheehan's teaching license. Sheehan resigned from teaching rather than appeal. I am not a bitter person, and only hope the best for education and scouting, regardless of the outcome of this hearing, he wrote in a statement. I do not feel that, disputing the allegations in court would help education, scouting or my family. Read William Sheehan's full statement to the Department of Education. Red flags. How could one man allegedly rape or molest so many boys and no one know about it, or if they knew, not intervene? Why didn't anyone see the red flags and try to help? I failed this young man, Briggs said with a pained look during the news press visit to his home. I should have picked up on them, but I wasn't looking for it. Photo gallery. Decades later, man returns to Camp Miles, site of alleged sexual abuse by Boy Scout leader. Sexual abuse had been a problem for the Boy Scouts of America almost since its inception, so much so that by 1989, all staff were required to watch a film called Time to Tell to make volunteers aware of child sexual abuse. The film was mandatory, Briggs said, but Sheehan skipped it? That was one red flag. Sheehan also gave Averhart a paid job on his waterfront staff, although he was undersized and underage, and lobbied to get him a promotion. We don't raise salaries, Briggs said. Another red flag. The camp director may have dismissed the warning signs because he liked his aquatics director. Everyone did. Bill was a wonderful guy. A school teacher with 2 sons, clean-cut and polished, he said. More, who was William Sheehan. Teacher, Boy Scout leader, alleged predator. One incident stayed with him, however. Sheehan went for a swim in the lake and was holding Everhart in the water when Briggs came upon them unannounced. "And I'll never forget this," he said. Bill's hand moved, real quick. "What's going on?" I said, and he answers, "Oh, Aaron had a cramp in his stomach and I'm rubbing it out." And little Aaron didn't dare say anything. I was very uncomfortable with that. Recently, Briggs, a leonine man in his 70s, now retired in Vero Beach, punched in Everhart's number on his smartphone, speaking with him for the first time in 30 years. "I just want you to know, pal, that I'm behind you 100%, the former Camp Miles director said. "I let you down, buddy. It really hurt when I found out what happened, and it was on my watch. The town that can't forget." There was no #MeToo movement in the winter of 1977 when 11-year-old Danny Smith had his first encounter with Foxborough Scout leader Bill Sheehan. "He said I had hypothermia, stripped me to my underwear and molested me," the grown-up Smith remembered. After that, he alleges, Sheehan molested him hundreds of times, lying on top of him and simulating sex until he climaxed. Homophobia, a fear of homosexuality in oneself or others, was and still is a powerful silencer. Tweet this. Danny Smith, former scout, Foxborough. He warned, "If you say something, people will think you're gay." He warned, "If you say something, people will think you're gay," Smith said. It took him 20 years to break our little secret, as the scout leader called it, the result of starting therapy. Sheehan by then had long moved to Florida and Camp Miles. "I feel tremendous guilt about Aaron," Smith said. "The Danny Smith of today is strong and fearless, but I wasn't then." As more men followed his example and came forward, Union Church pastor Bill Dudley became the confidant of a Bill Sheehan survivors group. Their allegations followed similar themes, he said. He preferred boys of a certain age, 7 to 12, Dudley said. He liked to abuse them where they could hear people in a utility room, for example, as people were going by in the hallway. He would abuse some boys, then drive them home and chat with their parents. As survivors came forward in greater numbers, Foxborough police suspected they could be dealing with a serial offender, according to a report by former police chief Edward O'Leary. But the state statute of limitations for sexual assault charges put the Massachusetts District Attorney's investigation on ice. Florida, too, has a short window for sexual abuse charges, especially considering that men wait on average 20 years to report it, experts say. They didn't tell me when I was 15 that I had a 4-year statute of limitations for something that would have a lifetime effect, Everhart said. State Representative Michael Gottlieb is among a few Florida legislators inking bills to allow sex crimes to be prosecuted anytime if the victim was younger than 16 when the crime occurred. So far, he said, the bill has had no pushback, only praise. In 2016, the Boy Scouts did settle for an undisclosed amount with 9 Foxborough men who were represented by Mitchell Garabedian, a Boston attorney enshrined in the movie Spotlight for representing victims sexually abused by Catholic priests. Bad, 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 is how Garabedian described Sheehan. In 2012, 4 actionable cases had emerged, and Foxborough detectives flew to Fort Myers, an arrest warrant in hand. Tweet this. Sandra Allen, Aaron Everhart's mother. What it has done to Aaron, and to us, I would do anything if I could to take it away. There they found Sheehan in a special care unit at Page Rehabilitation and Health Care Center, enfeebled by Alzheimer's disease, too weak to be served or stand trial. When I heard he was alive with Alzheimer's, I wanted to find him and stab him with an ice pick, said Everhart's mother Sandra Allen as she ran her hands over the baby grand in her North Fort Myers living room, launching into Dvorak's Going Home. What it has done to Aaron, and to us, I would do anything if I could to take it away, she said. Sheehan died in 2017, likely with no memory of allegedly choking some of his scouts into unconsciousness while molesting or raping them, or lying in wait on wooded trails and having his way with them in the bushes. But they would never forget him. Finding Foxborough. Sandra Averhart still ponders why this happened to her son. Raising her children in North Fort Myers on streets named Poetry, Sonnet, and Rhyme, they had been a typical American family, she said. He was a sunny kid. Didn't know a stranger. I was glad both my boys were interested in scouting. It used to be such a good organization for young men. At least 1 in 6 men are sexually abused, according to the National Sexual Violence Resource Center, often before they're 18, an epic problem concealed by secrecy and shame. Tweet this. Timothy Kosnoff, sexual abuse attorney. It's possible that from 1/2 to 3/4 of a million former scouts may have been harmed at the hands of 75,000 living predators. The Boy Scouts of America's own records name thousands of likely victims who have yet to speak, many dating from the 1960s to the 1980s. A spokeswoman sidestepped the question of whether it kept a record on Sheehan. This individual is not registered in our programs and has been ineligible to serve as a volunteer for many years, she wrote. Timothy Kosnoff, whose legal team recently filed suit against the Texas-based organization, naming hundreds of survivors, estimated that during a 20-year period, the Boy Scouts was opening a new confidential incident file every other day. Averhart said he is thinking of joining the case. More, there's no rehabbing the Boy Scouts. Former scout speaks out about latest lawsuit. And that's just the tip of the iceberg, Kosnoff said. It's possible that from 1/2 to 3/4 of a million former scouts may have been harmed at the hands of 75,000 living predators. More, he believes, than in the Catholic Church. Shimp, the former Southwest Florida Council member who suspended Sheehan, protested USA Today's reporting on lawsuits that he thinks only serve to dredge up the organization's past. What happened 30 years ago in our society is not relevant today, Shimp said. It downplays the fact that the Boy Scouts of America has been a leader in background checks and youth protection training. Pedophiles don't play by the rules, however. Those safeguards would not have stopped Sheehan, Averhart believes. I'm pretty sure my therapist, and hundreds of others, can validate the relevancy of what happened 30 years ago, he said. I was in denial after Camp Miles. I stuffed 90% of it. Only now at age 45 is he beginning to deal with the after effects of being sexually abused. One night in 2016, while surfing the internet, Averhart was shocked to see Sheehan's name pop up in a series of news stories, all from Foxborough. Finding a whole town that had been abused by the same person brought it all back to the surface. My life went off the rails, he said. A licensed handyman, his work suffered. After a heady New England visit, he plunged into a medicated stupor. I'd come home in the afternoon and he would be asleep, said Melinda Averhart, his wife, who has since asked for a divorce. Foxborough opened it up. Then he decided to write the book. It took over our lives. The book, Finding Foxborough, was Averhart's first detailed account and his parents' first glimpse of all he had been through. There were parts of it where I just sat there and cried, his mother said. A photo on the book's cover shows the office building his sex cave, as she called it, where Sheehan allegedly took many of his Foxborough victims, a building the Averharts joined in helping the townspeople of Foxborough tear down in a 2017 ceremony. Tweet this. Former Foxborough scout Kevin Corliss. I hope Aaron knows we're so very proud of him. It was a cold spring day in Massachusetts, and sledgehammers had been laid on the ground for anyone who wanted to have a go. I never knew a sledgehammer weighed so much, Mrs. Averhart said. A Sheehan survivor helped her raise the hammer so she could smash it down with the others, until by day's end you could not tell a building had been there. I hope Aaron knows we're so very proud of him, said Corliss, one of many who testified at the event. By speaking out, he kept Sheehan from continuing to be a scout leader and having a license to teach. Something we were unable to do. Follow this reporter on Twitter at Patricia Borns. To get help. ACT is a sexual assault full-service center for men and women, operating 24 hours per day, 7 days a week, in Fort Myers and LaBelle. Call the 24-hour hotline at 239-939-3112 or visit actabuse.com. Spark, Safe Place and Rape Crisis Center, offers support groups and free services to sexual assault victims in Sarasota, Arcadia, and Northport. Call the 24-hour hotline at 941-365-1976 or visit sparksea.net. A partnership of sexual abuse attorneys formed Abused in Scouting, offering legal help to scouts. Call 1-888-99-SCOUT or email abusedInscouting.com. Pastor Bill Dudley of Foxborough offers an informal Bill Sheehan survivors group and will talk with Southwest Florida survivors by phone. Call 508-479-8352. If you are a survivor or know someone who is, please call the news press in confidence at 239-839-5931 or email pborns@news-press.com.
Hey Charlotte County, this is Charlotte County Cop Watch. I am using any video here with under fair use if you have criticism, reporting, teaching, etc. And please donate. I do not make money from YouTube, and there are different ways to donate in the video links. Thanks.